Good morning. I can hear a pin drop.
Good morning, everyone. How are you today? It's a beautiful day, and what a wonderful opportunity we have. I'm Anthony Crowell. I'm the Dean and President of New York Law School, and I'm also the Faculty Director of our Center for New York City and State Law. I'm so excited to welcome all of you to our school and to this inaugural Constitution and Citizenship Day Summit, which is a special collaboration between New York Law School, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit's Honorable Robert A. Katzmann Justice for All Courts and the Community Initiative, and our own Center for New York City and State Law. We're so honored to convene this summit at a moment when renewing our commitment to civics education is essential to the strength of our democracy. And it is my profound privilege to welcome U.S. Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. She is a guardian of the Constitution and a voice that speaks to the lives of all Americans. Justice Sotomayor was born in the Bronx. She earned a BA from Princeton University, graduating summa cum laude from the university, and she was a member of Phi Beta Kappa and received the Pine Prize, the highest academic honor Princeton awards to an undergraduate. She then went on to earn a JD from Yale Law School, where she served as an editor of the Yale Law Journal. She then went to serve as an assistant district attorney in the New York County District Attorney's Office, just a few blocks from here, from 1979 to 1984. And then she litigated international commercial matters in New York City at Pavia and Harcourt, where she served as an associate and then partner from 1984 to 1992. In 1991, President George H.W. Bush nominated her to the U.S. District Court for the Southern District, and she served in that role from 1992 to 1998. She then was nominated by President Bill Clinton to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, where she served from 1998 to 2009, when President Barack Obama nominated her as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. We could have no better person than Justice Sotomayor to join us to celebrate Constitution and Citizenship Day. And as we begin, I want to pause to honor the extraordinary legacy of the late Chief Judge Robert A. Katzmann of the Second Circuit. Chief Judge Katzmann was a dear friend of Justice Sotomayor and a dear friend and mentor to many of us here today, including myself. He was not only a brilliant jurist, but also one of the nation's foremost champions of civics and citizenship education. He believed that the rule of law is only as strong as the public's understanding of it. And he showed us that civic education is not an ancillary activity of the courts, rather it is central to their mission. His work endures in the many students, teachers, and individuals who have been inspired to see themselves as participants in our democracy. And this morning's conversation is about the role of civics education in teaching about the rule of law and democratic institutions. It is meant to inform concrete work right here in New York, across every level of government and within our communities, and to help build models that can be replicated around the country as well. I'm delighted to introduce three distinguished jurists joining the Justice this morning in our conversation. First, the co-chairs of the Justice for All Courts and Community Initiatives and this summit, Judge Joseph Bianco of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, and Judge Victor Marrero of the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York. Let me say that Judge Bianco's and Judge Marrero's leadership have been incredibly inspiring, thoughtful, and supportive. I am incredibly grateful to you both. And finally, let me welcome Judge Anthony Cannataro, Associate Judge of the New York State Court of Appeals. He is a proud New York Law School alumnus and a distinguished adjunct professor who teaches state constitutional law here. He is also a member of our Summit's Planning Committee, and I thank you, Judge Cannataro. So together we will dive into the conversation with the candor, depth, and inspiration that this moment calls for. And before I sit down, I just want to acknowledge that we have more than 550 people participating in the summit today between our auditorium and the room upstairs where the proceedings are being simulcast. So I think this means that, well, democracy is popular. So now it is my honor to moderate this conversation. Thank you for being with us, Justice. It's really incredible. And we're going to have a really thoughtful conversation. I'd love to know how your knowledge of civics was shaped as a student.
Like too many students, I didn't learn it in the classroom. I learned it in large part in my extracurricular activities. And so my grammar school, maybe in social studies, I was young, taught me what the three branches of government were, sort of the basics. What they didn't teach back then was the principles that motivated the structure of government, and really didn't explain in more than a cursory way what the functions were between the branches and what the expectations were of service in government. And that is what people like these and all of us are trying to change. To have it taught in a deep dive way in which you're not just listening to the words of what rule of law means, but that you understand them and that you understand their why. And that's what was missing for me. I was fortunate because I think I was born a lawyer. For those who have read my book, you know that I actually was, from very, very young, I was directed this way. But I joined debate and extemporaneous speaking in my grammar school, loved it. And when I jumped into high school, I continued that process, both, especially in debate, because a lot of the questions are political questions. You get to argue both sides. And that helped make me a more informed person. And then I got dragged into student government. I lost running for president of my school. And the nicest time that I ever had was at a party where one of our students had a little bit to imbibe that they weren't supposed to. And they were in the bathroom, and I was in the bathroom and looked at her and said, "Get the heck out of here. You're going to get kicked out." And I escorted her through a way that she could get out. And she looked at me and she said, "I should have voted for you for president." It's a little too late, Anyway,
Choices.
Choices. And in college, I became involved in a community activity because of a newspaper article that I read while I was in the library about a hospital that had kept a man who spoke Spanish for 3 weeks. Because at the time, and this has changed dramatically, I think almost everywhere, at the time they had no Spanish-speaking staff, which is hard to imagine today. But remember, this is like, what now? 50 years ago. My gosh, 50 years ago. I'm going to be my 50th college graduation is this coming year. At any rate, 50 years ago, that was the case. And I read the article and I became angry. But I also went and spoke to my classmates from Acción Puertorriqueña, the student Latino group, and said to them, we should volunteer there. And we should meet with them once a week to just make sure that this doesn't happen to anyone else, but at least to have them exposed to someone who speaks their language. And that was my first act of community service. And as you'll hear, I think, Dean, in other responses by me, I think of civic participation as community service.
Yeah.
And that, I think, was born from that. Now I'm a member of the board of the iCivics.org organization, started by my sister, Sandra Day O'Connor. And for everyone in this room and in the overflow room, by the way, if the overflow room doesn't run when I leave, I'll go over and greet all of you, okay? At any rate, not you, you're here. Okay. I challenge everyone in this room, adult or not, to go to the iCivics.org. It teaches civic participation through video games. Go take Do I Have a Right? And if you don't pass the game, and some of you won't, stay in school.
Got it. You know, I think you open up the whole concept of accessibility to civics and information on the internet. And surveys show that Americans have a declining knowledge about how government works and what the rights are that the Constitution protects. From your perspective, could this at some point undermine the legitimacy of government or its institutions? And what role can social media play in reversing this declining knowledge?
There's no question in my mind that social media is one of the largest causes of misinformation on the internet. Everyone has a responsibility to become media literate. It is the number one priority of iCivics. It should be the number one priority in every program devoted to educating our people. If you're only hearing one side of the story, you're not making an informed decision about your life. Laws are what govern your relationships in every level of life. From the moment you're a child and you stop at a light, it's because the law says, stop on red, go on green, all right? If you're a student, the school is governed by all sets of regulations about what they can or cannot do to you. Employment relationships, family relationships. What do you think family court's about? So if you are permitting or asking for laws to be changed without fully understanding the consequences of that choice, the other side, and what the cost is, then we're going to live in a world where people are going to have laws run over them because they're not looking at oncoming traffic. And to me, that's not a sensible way to live your life. But it's a critical way for us to live in a democracy, a literacy in media. Because without it, we are not only affecting our own lives, but the lives of so many others in ways that someday you may wake up and deeply regret. Why? Eyes wide open. The world is a complex place, and issues are always difficult. So learn how to think about them and learn how and what effect laws can have on.
Really thoughtful. I think Chief Judge Katzmann certainly understood that broader picture as well. And could you talk a little bit about how his approach and vision with respect to civics in the Second Circuit courts serves as a model for other courts, and what steps could be taken by other branches of government to create something that really embraces the public and informs them in a meaningful and strategic way?
Judge Katzmann's widow is here with us, Jennifer Callahan, and she doesn't want to shout out, but I'm giving it to her anyway. She was integral in putting this conference together. I think you agree.
She was. She's amazing.
Jennifer, how old was Bob when he sent that letter about the traffic light? 10 years old. There was an accident at a particular corner, and 10-year-old Bob Katzmann wrote a letter to, I think, Mayor Wagner, explaining in very lawyerly-like way all the reasons why a traffic light should be there. Now, you can imagine the consternation of the Katzmann family when a policeman showed up at the door and asked for Robert Katzmann. That was Bob's first introduction, or at least visible understanding of what civic involvement was. I think Bob had the vision that I shared, which was that civic participation is community service on all levels of community. It's not just serving in government in an elected position or in an appointed position. It's helping to run your community in a better way for everyone. So for him, writing that letter, he was a 10-year-old. He got a response, right? Doesn't always happen. Disappointment follows lots of attempts. But when Bob became chief judge, he realized that civic participation, we could have students come in and do moot courts, as many of this audience have done, okay? But that wasn't enough. And what he did, and Joe and Victor can correct me if I'm wrong, is he challenged every district court and designated someone from that court as responsible for doing it, to come up with different programs that engage students. And so we went from just moot courts to how many programs did he? This
dozen different programs.
a dozen different programs. Every circuit, every district court, our circuit and every district court found a different way of doing outreach to the community. I just attended this summer one of those programs, which was an offshoot of something else, which is having students do art about democracy in the courts. And the question they were asked was, who's your favorite Supreme Court justice? And I got to meet with the kids who picked me. And anyway, I let the other justices meet with their kids. But when I saw the art, by having to study me, to be able to portray me in a meaningful way, these students learned more about their government. And it's these kinds of programs that Bob inspired. Shortly before he died, he convenes and helped convene a conference of federal judges across the country, from all district courts and other circuits in the country. And in many, many of the states, that meeting initiated the same kinds of programs across the country. I've been to Minnesota. I've been to many other places that picking up on Bob's image, on ideas that have made a huge difference in the court system. But my bottom line message, as it was his, don't think of service always in grand terms. Think of it in terms of every day, every act you take, every activity you elect to do. Ask yourself a question: how does it help others? All right. And so don't think of it as just government service, but community service.
That's great. I'd like to talk a little bit about civics education reforms in state and local governments and community-based organizations. So, and we'll open up the conversation to all of you. But Justice Sotomayor, as civics education evolves, how might we balance teaching the mechanics of government with encouraging critical thinking about issues like justice, equality, and the rule of law? And I speak a lot about this. How do we reach adults who may have gaps in knowledge? We talk a lot about children, and it's important. It builds the foundation, but if they don't have that environment at home that nurtures what they're learning in school, that's a problem. And certainly adults make choices that not only affect themselves, but affect their families. So that kind of education is important. What are your thoughts?
I believe children can teach their parents. And I think that that's the one thing that schools fail to do regularly. When I've spoken to bilingual parents, I tell them, go do the lessons your children are doing to learn English with their parents. Ask your child to practice with them. I think the same thing holds true for schools encouraging children to engage their parents in conversations about these issues. Now, you ask, how do you balance critical thinking with structural information? I think they go hand in hand. Do we understand what the difference is between a king and a president? All right. And I think if people understood these things from the beginning, they would be more informed as to what would be important in a democracy in terms of what people can or should not do. But you can't make or criticize until you understand the reasoning behind the structure. And so for me, it's my hope that schools will do more of that, as I started the conversation with, teaching about the why, but also encouraging children to draw their parents in. I'm also a very big proponent of adult education classes. And so you're talking to the wrong person because I would put more responsibility on schools.
Judge Bianco, some thoughts, Judge Moreno?
Thank you, Dean, for letting me be part of this discussion. Thank you, Justice Sotomayor, for being here. And Judge Moreno and I know there is no bigger supporter of civics for the Second Circuit programs than Justice Sotomayor. Despite her busy schedule, she's always there for us, and it makes all the difference. Nobody can inspire students the way Justice Sotomayor can. So thank you. The mechanics with respect to civics, like Justice Sotomayor, I don't remember much from grammar school. I was in Brooklyn playing stickball, but I agree to the extent that we learned it. We learned the branches of government, separations of power, but not rule of law, due process, equality. Those concepts really weren't highlighted. And what happens now is, as Justice Sotomayor pointed out, through social media, the kids learn civics in that way in school, and then social media and the internet and all kinds of forces shape their perception of those things in a negative way. I do hundreds of field trips over the years, and I get letters from fifth graders along these lines. Dear Judge Bianco, thanks for the field trip. I thought you were going to be mean, old, and yell at us, but I was wrong. And I'm like, this is a fifth grader. Set the bar that I'm trying, a very low bar for what they think of their judges, but they reform these perceptions through these various forces that are out there. And all of us have this opportunity, a unique opportunity, to dispel those perceptions, to reshape what are the principles that are important to our country, and they come alive. We can make those come alive through the courts, and that's what our programming is all about. We bring in speakers. If you want to know about due process, we have Deirdre Von Dornum, the Chief of Federal Defenders, who's representing Mr. Sarnev in the Boston bombing case, trying to get his death penalty overturned. Professor Burkholder spoke about Miranda to the camp, made that come alive. We have all these people who like Judge Katzmann, who breathe these principles, they live these principles, they serve these principles, and that's when the students really see these principles come alive. We have them observe the naturalization ceremony. Yes. They'll never forget that. We have them observe the Second Circuit. Sometimes it's boring, as Justice Sotomayor knows. Depends on the day. It could be an insurance case, but they're watching, they're watching the courts in action. And, there's no replacing those unique moments that courts provide. And then the last thing we do is many of our programs, not just the moot courts, but our camps, our after-school programs, try to give them some advocacy skills. So be confident and stand up in a civilized way and be a voice for the voiceless. So all the programs are designed really to supplement, enhance what they're learning in the schools.
Great. Judge Marrero, some thoughts?
Yes. Bob Katzmann didn't believe and push for civic education in the abstract. He had a vision, and his vision, there was a relationship between civic education and the rule of law and judicial independence and democracy, bottom line. And so as he structured the program, he had in mind that it wasn't just pushing the idea of civic education, but it's really protecting, preserving our Constitution and the rule of law and democracy.
Judge Canataro, some thoughts?
So I will say, I think that we in the state courts have a unique ability or a unique opportunity to deliver this message that we've heard so eloquently articulated by my other three co-panelists. Only because the New York State courts are in every city, town, and village in the state. And in terms of sheer numerosity, the numbers of cases and people who come into our courthouses are orders of magnitude larger than the business that the federal courts get. So we do have a great opportunity to reach these people. Unfortunately, we might not have had our Chief Judge Katzmann yet, who's made this a real priority, but this is what I hope we're here to do today. I share the sentiment that's been expressed repeatedly, that this is one of the core values of American citizenship. It is simply not enough, It's great if you go to school and you learn that there are 3 branches of government and that the legislature makes the laws and the executive enforces the laws and the judiciary interprets the laws. That you're probably ahead of a huge proportion of the American population just in knowing that. But true civics participation really requires a lot more than that. It's a daily exercise to take the time to learn how our government works, why it works the way it does. And that duality that Justice Sotomayor was talking to, it's not enough to have a point of view and seek confirmation for your point of view. You really need to understand the totality of the argument, the pros and the cons, and make an informed decision about not what would be best for yourself, because again, Justice Sotomayor already said this. It's how does this help my community? How does this help others? That is the highest, I think, articulation of what civic responsibility is.
Dean, there was one recent study, not so recent now, a few years back, that polled young people. 30% of them said they didn't believe in democracy. What's left?
So speaking to those children, as we said, we often think of civics education as something that happens in the K-12 classrooms, but those classrooms largely fall under state and local control. So how might federalism both help, but also complicate the effort to create a more robust and consistent civics curriculum across the nation?
I'm fighting the premise. I don't think you need to federalize everything.
No, but
And I do think the federal, for every for STEM classes, the government, both federal and state, devote $50. For civic education, they all devote 5 cents. All right, the disparity is enormous, okay? Everybody needs more resources. And people want to do things, but unless you have the resources, often you can't. Civics is easier. It's almost easier than STEM because you don't need hard equipment for it. All right, it is really pure teaching. But I do think that federal government could have standards of achievement for civics, and that those standards be encouraged to be applied in the states. Florida is doing that. Florida is one of the highest users of iCivics.org, in part because they require students to pass a civics exam before they leave grammar school. There are things of that nature and that can be instituted. Arizona, which was Justice O'Connor's state, doesn't have a course, but the state has made civics a required teaching mode in their grammar schools. Anything like that could help. And if the federal government gives out lots of grants, they could condition some of those grants in the teaching of civics. Right now, they're not. And so there are changes in federal law that could be instituted.
yeah, what we have is a real patchwork of curricula throughout the nation, some much stronger than others, different requirements. And so you find these gaps. And
Well, there's going to be gaps. I worry less about the places that have something but not enough than the fact that there are so many places that have nothing.
that have nothing, correct, yeah. Judge Bianco, Judge Moreau, thoughts on this question and from your vantage
I
point?
agree with Justice Sotomayor. We do a lot of programming, but we don't get involved in curriculum. Jenna Real is here from New York City Board of Education. They do a great job trying to elevate physics in the school districts and in the city. And we're here to supplement that, to add to that. And so one of the programs we had that's focused on that aspect of it is the Teachers Institute. Judges Cave and Viscastle, through the Justice Resource Center, have teachers come for several days through the courthouse and learn about the topic, First Amendment. Floyd Abrams comes and speaks to them. And then the idea is that they'll go back into the classrooms and again, be able to bring the First Amendment alive because they're not lawyers. They may not have an understanding of the First Amendment that would be helpful for the students to get. So the Teachers Institute, and then again, we send speakers into the classroom. We have them come to the courthouse and they hear from people there. So we're supplementing the curriculum trying to dictate it.
Judge Morrell?
One of the things that bothered Judge Katzmann was the enormous gap that there is in the public's knowledge of civics, civic education, and government itself. He used to look at statistics showing the huge number of Americans who could not tell what are the three branches of government, for example, or the huge number who believe that Judge Judy is a member of the Supreme Court. So
She is a graduate of this school, but not a member of the Supreme Court.
I get it asked all the times, and I'm friends with Judge Judy.
let me read a quote that inspired Judge Katzmann. This is his own words. There must be a shared understanding of the principles, values, and basic workings of the constitutional system. If that is lost, then I worry that all that will be left will be corrosive cynicism about the perceived failings of that system, without the recognition of all of the reasons our constitutional system is worth preserving.
Really thoughtful. Judge Canto, some thoughts, particularly from the state level, and you teach state constitutional law, which gives you some unique insights.
Yeah, I was just gonna.
As we've discussed.
I was just going to mention that my colleagues and I on the state bench are, I guess, privileged and maybe a little scared to be living in a moment where we are certainly having a resurgence of thought about state law, state constitutionalism, and what federalism means. And that is kind of one of the core themes that go throughout my constitutional law class here at New York Law School. What is judicial federalism? How do the federal and state courts communicate with each other? What are our respective spheres of authority and of influence? And, this is highly advanced civics, but I think this is sort of what we're all speaking to. There's so much more to it than just understanding, the very basic thing that we expect all eighth graders to know. So I hope that everyone will continue to engage with it. Since Judge Marrero just read a quote, I'd like to read a quote. So I'll set it up. I recently moved to the suburbs a few years ago, and I've become a commuter now. And I've had to figure out ways to fill my commuting time. And one of the things I've explored is the wonderful world of podcasts. And I've been trying to educate myself through podcasts. And it's a little ironic that we're all here talking about educating yourself and coming to your own conclusions. And I'm about to read something that I heard in a podcast. But I promise you, I'm not reading this in order to tell you what to think, but I'm reading it as an expression of what I think is exactly the sentiment that we're all trying to instill today. So this is from a podcast, a great one, by the way, called We the People. I don't know if I'm the last one to the party on this, but it's produced by the National Constitution Center, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization, and they talk about constitutional principles. And they're launching a new one called Pursuit, which is a 12-part series just dedicated to what this term pursuit of happiness means, what it meant to the founders, what it means to us today. And in an interview between the president of the NCC and Robert George, who is the McCormick Professor of Jurisprudence and the director of the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions at Princeton University, Mr. Rosen asked Professor George why it was so important to engage in learning about the principles of the American idea and to understand the founders' desire to achieve self-mastery so that they could keep the republic. Keep the republic. That reminds you of Benjamin Franklin's probably apocryphal statement that you have to keep the republic. You're not just handed it. So this is what Professor George says. He says, well, let me address that by talking about the importance of maintaining this experiment. The founders themselves understood their project the American Republic, to be an experiment precisely because all past attempts, all previous attempts to establish and maintain a Republican government had failed. And when they failed, so often they collapsed into the worst forms of tyranny. It is for each generation to keep the experiment going. There will never be a point when we can say, mission accomplished. Now we have a genuine republic for perpetuity, and nobody has to worry about that anymore. This republic could still collapse if we lack virtue and if we lack a sound understanding of our civic order, of our own constitutional principles and structures. And that means we have to be attentive to them constantly throughout our whole lives. If you live to be 110 years old, it's still good to be educating yourself about our civic order. That's a process that should never stop. And I really hope that we all walk away today intuitively understanding exactly what Professor George meant by this continuous process of educating ourselves, because that's the key to everything.
That's powerful. And it leads to another and very logical question, law schools. Justice Sotomayor, what are the roles that law schools play, and should they bear more responsibility for instilling civic awareness, not only in our own students and the broader profession and in ensuring the public has those messages?
Sure.
There's 200 of us.
I know. And the thing that gets to me is every time I listen to a lawyer-trained representative saying we should criminalize free speech in some way, I think to myself, that law school failed. All right. If any student who becomes a lawyer hasn't been taught civics, then the law school has failed. It should be as critically a part of the curricula as your first year courses, because it is for that system that you're working as a lawyer. And if you don't understand it, and you don't understand how the system affects you and your clients, then you will never be in a position either to advocate for change or even to represent in a fulsome way. So unlike many, many others who don't like involuntary servitude, I am very much in favor of requiring civic education in law schools. I'm very much in favor of requiring public service in law school. Very broad definition of it. I don't think it's, working for the government or anything like that, but something outside, to work in something outside your classroom, in something where you can make a difference and affect something for the positive. I think these things are critical for law schools to start thinking about and integrating as requirements in their projects.
Yeah, that really will enhance the professional identity formation that we're all trying to work towards with our students. And we have as a profession, we have a broader responsibility, and that will certainly instill some more of exactly the ideas and opportunities that we learn in law school translate to the broader community. Judge Bianco, thoughts?
Judge Katzmann and Judge Marrero, many years back, had a meeting with, I think it's 19 law schools, deans. And Judge Katzmann said, "We need you."
I was there.
Yeah. And then Judge Marrero and I did it again several years ago, because it is a critical partner in this effort. And as Justice Sotomayor said, it begins in law school.
Yep.
It begins in law school. And we now have programs where it's a 2-day, the same students from various high schools, they go to the federal court one day, and then they go to the law school. And they meet with students and a professor. And it's a wonderful program that we're hoping to expand. Just yesterday, I was at Columbia, and they have 150 high school students come on Saturdays for weeks during the semester to learn about the law. And again, we're partnering with them to bring those kids, not on a Saturday to the courthouse because we're not there, but on a weekday, so that we can help them. But just think about law students who are already doing that type of thing. These kids were beaming, the law students, about this work that they're doing.
So those efforts really harness exactly what Justice Sotomayor is saying, is that not only giving the law students themselves the knowledge, ensuring that they're growing in their knowledge, but also then giving the community service, public service to educate others, and it builds that into a pipeline of information to the community. Judge Morrell?
Well, law schools have a great resource in the institution. They have the physical space, they have the students, they have the faculty, but they're not putting it together in enough of an effective model to be able to deliver civic education. I think that the challenge should be to take those unique resources and put them to work in the mission of civic education.
Certainly everyone on the panel has taught, but what are you seeing in your classroom, Judge Kenneth?
Happily, I'm seeing very engaged and fecund minds in front of me. So that's really encouraging. And I think
That is positive. They may be self-selecting for a smaller course like state constitutional law.
well, yeah, but even law school is self-selecting to a degree. But
sure.
this is the audience, or I don't know how many people here are students, but I see a lot of judges out there, by the way. These are the group, if not people who are interested in the law, then who else is it that's going to be interested in what it is we're talking about here and today? So I think there's a role for it in the law school. There's a role for it in the courts. And if these institutions successfully instill the importance of this issue and a love for learning about this issue, hopefully every single one of you who has those values drummed into you will then take it out into the world and try and share it with others. That's what we need. We need an almost evangelical approach to civics and civics education. This is important stuff. This is the future of our country. You have to get everyone to understand that.
So how does it flow from the law school to the bar associations? You do an incredible amount of work with bar associations.
I'm not sure of the mechanics of the conversation between the law schools and the bar associations, but again, a bar association is a great example of a place where you are likely to have fertile ground for this kind of education and this kind of thought. I think it's incumbent on all of us who think that this is an important message to deliver, to find those places, those target-rich environments where those minds are and those like-minded individuals are, and make sure that they understand that this is something that not only do we have to perfect in ourselves, but we have to sort of bring it out in others that we encounter.
So Justice Sotomayor,
If I could, Joe, didn't Bob invite some bar associations to participate in the Second Circuit's
Yes.
program?
They're on our committee.
And the Federal Bar Council is also a part of it. And by setting forth expectations, being the leader, I think it has made a tremendous difference in New York. There is a real, at least on the federal level, there's a real organized attempt to address the issue.
yeah, I should mention both the New York State Bar Association recently issued a report on civics education. New York City Bar Association has a task force. It's incredible. What are your hopes for the profession in this area? Is the last question to you, Justice Sotomayor.
What does rule of law mean? If you look at the dictionary, it tells you that it's a society in which its leaders are constrained by rules that they follow. Very antiseptic definition, okay? But as a very dear friend of mine, a judge from Canada, justice from Canada, said to an audience, and it took me aback, remember that slavery and desegregation were laws too. The assumption that all laws are good is not necessarily a starting proposition. We've already experienced in our country bad laws. Laws that even the Supreme Court at one point said were unconstitutional, okay? That only happens, however, if people don't understand, and this was Bob's insight, that what the rule of law means is that we're being ruled by citizens who have thoughtfully considered and engaged in the process of law. The moment we take the people out of the equation, which is happening more and more with so many people who are not voting, once we do that, we do lose the Republican. For the students in the audience who don't know what the Ben Franklin statement was, he was coming out of the Constitutional Convention, and a woman, Lady Duchess, stops him and asks him, Mr. Franklin, or I think it was Dr. Franklin, what kind of government do we have? Do we have a monarchy or not? And his short clip was, we have a republic, madam, if we can keep it. So for me, my hope and why educating our students is so critical is because I see them as the future. They are our hope to fix the mistakes that we are making. And boy, are they big mistakes. All right. Think about all the things that you see in the world that are wrong, starting with two wars and regional conflicts. But think of everything that's happening in the United States. And you have to pause and say, we adults have really messed this up. My hope is that the students who participate in programs like this will figure out how to do a better job.
Thank you. Really inspiring and a good set of opportunities for us to do better and to persevere. Thank you for everything. Thank you for being with us.
Hi.